Everyone thinks they know this story. A beautiful Egyptian obelisk in the heart of Paris. Napoleon brought it back. A trophy. A decoration. Background for 1 million Instagram photos. All of that is wrong. Napoleon never touched this stone. It arrived 15 years after his death. And it is not decoration. It is a 3,300-year-old message, encoded in stone, addressed to an audience that no longer exists. Waiting for someone to read it. For 185 years, it stood in one of the world's busiest public squares. Millions of people walked past it. No one read it. Not until a Sorbonne professor stood in the middle of a Paris traffic circle during a pandemic lockdown and finally looked from the right angle. Go back 3,300 years to the temple at Luxor on the banks of the Nile. Once a year, during the Opet festival, Egypt's most powerful people made a pilgrimage by boat. Nobles, priests, the educated elite who could read hieroglyphs. They floated down the Nile toward Luxor Temple, the sun rising behind them, and there, flanking the entrance, stood 2 red granite obelisks, 22 meters tall, quarried from a single piece of stone in Aswan, floated 100 miles upriver on custom barges, each one weighing 230 tons. They were ordered by Ramesses II, history's most celebrated pharaoh, double of Abu Simbel, ruler for 66 years, the man whose armies fought at Kadesh, the man who put his name on every monument in Egypt, even the ones he didn't build. Here's what nobody told you about Ramesses II. He was terrified. In Egyptian theology, a pharaoh's divine power came partly from being born of a king's divine aura, conceived while his father already wore the crown. Ramesses' defect was not. His father, Seti, became pharaoh after Ramesses was already born, which meant, according to the most powerful priests and nobles in Egypt, that Ramesses lacked something essential, something divine. The nobility knew it, and Ramesses knew they knew. So he did what powerful people have always done when legitimacy is uncertain. He manufactured it. He built more monuments than any pharaoh before him. He rewrote history. He chiseled his name onto temples built by others. He commissioned armies of scribes and artists to document his divine greatness. And into the 2 obelisks at Luxor, the ones the elite nobility would see every year, arriving by boat, he encoded something extraordinary. 7 secret messages, hidden in plain sight, readable only by the literate few who knew where to stand. Those 7 messages, what exactly did they say? And why did they disappear for 3,300 years? We'll get there. Fast forward 3,000 years. Paris, September 27th, 1822. A 32-year-old linguist named Jean-François Champollion burst into his brother's office. He had been working for years on a single problem: how to decode Egyptian hieroglyphics, a writing system silent for 1,400 years. He shouted, "I've got it." And then he collapsed. He didn't wake for 5 days. Champollion had decoded the Rosetta Stone. He'd cracked the language of the pharaohs. And within 7 years, his achievement set off a chain of events that would bring one of Ramesses' defect's 2 obelisks to France. Muhammad Ali Pasha, the Ottoman viceroy of Egypt, a calculating political modernizer, offered France the 2 Luxor obelisks as a diplomatic gift, partly in gratitude for Champollion's breakthrough, partly to secure French military support. France accepted. The project fell to a 33-year-old naval engineer named Jean-Baptiste Apollinaire Lebas. Champollion himself traveled to Luxor in 1828 and personally selected the western obelisk for transport. He lobbied for the mission. He was the reason no one in Europe had moved an obelisk in 247 years. The last person to do it was Domenico Fontana for the Vatican. In 1586, Lebas had no precedent, no modern engineering to draw from, just physics, rope, and nerve. The obelisk was felled at Luxor on August 14, 1831. Workers dug a special canal to drag 230 tons of stone, 400 meters to the Nile. Then plague hit the crew. They ran out of wood. The ship ran aground. They waited 17 months for the Nile to flood high enough to float again. 17 months, stuck in Egypt. Crew dying. Mission in doubt. Lebas didn't quit. The convoy finally left Egypt in August 1832, crossed the Mediterranean, arrived at Toulon on May 10, 1833, then slowly, painstakingly up the Seine, navigating Parisian bridges with a barge designed specifically to pass under them carrying a monolith, arriving in Paris on December 23, 1833, 9,000 kilometers, over 7 years, start to finish, and now here's where it gets truly extraordinary. October 25, 1836, Place de la Concorde, 200,000 people packed the square. They lined the Champs-Élysées. They climbed onto rooftops. Every window overlooking the plaza was filled. They were watching an engineer try to raise 230 tons of pink granite, using ropes, counterweights, and calculations he had never tested at this scale. King Louis-Philippe watched from the window of the Hôtel de la Marine. His position was chosen carefully. He could see everything, and quietly slip away if the stone fell and shattered. Lebas had no such exit. He stood deliberately beneath the obelisk as it swung up, positioning himself in the kill zone, where he would die if it fell. His crew knew it. The crowd knew it. This was not an accident. This was a professional statement. If his calculations were wrong, he would not survive to be disgraced. The ropes held, the counterweights balanced. The obelisk rose, slowly, impossibly, and locked into place on its pedestal. The crowd erupted. The king appeared at the window to take the applause. Lebas walked out from beneath the stone, still alive. After it was over, someone asked him about moving the second obelisk, the matching one still at Luxor. He said, "The second obelisk will be conveyed by whoever wants, but not by me." France never went back. Now, stop! Look at where Lebas placed this stone. Place de la Concorde had been Place de la Révolution from May 11, 1793 to June 1794. A guillotine stood on this exact spot. The blade fell 1,119 times. King Louis XVI, January 21, 1793. His head as into a basket. Marie Antoinette, October 16, 1793. Charlotte Corday, Danton, de Moulin, and finally Robespierre himself, the man who ran the machine, 1,119 people, guillotined on the ground where this obelisk now stands, many of them executed for claiming or being suspected of defending the divine right of kings. And now, on that exact ground, stands a 3,300-year-old monument, a monument carved to assert one man's divine right to rule. Ramesses II's political propaganda, encoded in stone for an audience of Egyptian nobles, permanently rooted in the killing field of French divine monarchy. King Louis-Philippe chose this square because an ancient Egyptian monument was politically neutral, no connection to French politics, no dangerous symbolism. The symbolism was just invisible to him, And one more thing. When Lebus raised the obelisk, he placed it rotated 90 degrees counterclockwise from its original position. The face that pointed east in Thebes now points north in Paris. Every solar alignment the obelisk was designed around. Every sunrise that would have struck its gold-capped peak at a precise angle is permanently wrong. There is a bronze plaque on the pedestal recording this rotation. Millions walk past it annually without reading it. The pharaoh's propaganda machine was disassembled, shipped 9,000 kilometers, and rebuilt, facing the wrong direction. December 2021. Paris was in COVID lockdown. The square was finally empty. Jean-Guillaume Olette-Pelletier, professor at the Sorbonne and the Catholic Institute of Paris, had lived near Place de la Concorde for years. He walked past the obelisk almost daily. During a renovation period, he noticed something. The hieroglyphs seemed to indicate a direction, a specific angle. He began studying the stone carefully. Standing in the traffic circle at night with binoculars, notebook in hand, recalculating where an observer would have stood to read these inscriptions at Luxor temple. He worked out the ancient viewing position, the Nile barge route, the angle of approach during the Opet festival, and he realized, to read the full messages, you had to walk around the monument. Just as the nobles would have drifted past on their boats, the crypto-hieroglyphs were kinetic. They were designed for motion. Some messages only appeared at 45-degree angles. Others required the viewer to physically move. He was standing in the middle of a Paris traffic circle, trying to reconstruct the viewing position of an Egyptian noble on the Nile in 1250 BCE. What he found were 7 hidden messages, encoded using crypto-hieroglyphs, a technique using visual wordplay, perspective tricks, and 3-dimensional layering. First academically identified in the 1950s, but never studied on this obelisk before. The messages were direct, explicit, political. The king confirms himself as the incarnate god, who cannot be dethroned, a pharaoh's private terror, carved in stone, addressed to the only audience who could read it, and then lost for 3,233 years, standing in one of the world's most visited squares. Olette-Pelletier became the first Egyptologist to closely examine these inscriptions. Since 1836, 185 years, the obelisk had been here the whole time. There is one more irony. When France received one of the world's most significant ancient monuments, it gave Egypt a mechanical clock for Cairo's citadel. The clock reportedly never worked. It sits there today. France technically owned both obelisks until 1981, 152 years. That year, President Mitterrand quietly signed away the second one, returned legal ownership to Egypt. The obelisk never moved. It stands in Luxor still. At the original site, the one that did move was never offered back. Ramesses II ruled Egypt for 66 years. He was one of the most powerful human beings who ever lived, and he was terrified enough to carve secret reassurances into stone, addressed to the educated few who might have taken his throne. Power has always been insecure. That has never changed. The obelisk stood in Paris for 185 years, speaking. Nobody listened, not because the messages were hidden underground or locked in a vault, because nobody thought to look from the right angle. How many things in your world are speaking, and you haven't found the angle yet? The obelisk is still there, still facing the wrong direction, still carrying a pharaoh's fear. 3,300 years, and the stone is still talking. Ramesses the educated few who might have taken his throne. Power has always been insecure. That has never changed. The obelisk stood in Paris for 185 years, speaking. Nobody listened, not because the messages were hidden underground or locked in a vault. Because nobody thought to look from the right angle. How many things in your world are speaking and you haven't found the angle yet? The obelisk is still there, still facing the wrong direction, still carrying a pharaoh's fear. 3,300 years. Nobody noticed, too. The pharaoh's lie. 7 secret messages hidden in the heart of Paris. 3. The obelisk that stood on a guillotine ground and carried a king's deepest secret. 4. How a COVID lockdown decoded a 3,300-year-old pharaoh's propaganda. 5. Paris has an ancient Egyptian obelisk. It's been lying to us the whole time.